In the manifestation community, one of the biggest misconceptions or areas of confusion that I see is regarding the topic of states. So, in this video, I want to go through exactly what a state is and also why a state is not an emotion or a mood, and why getting into the state is just as simple as relaxing and trusting the process. So, I will preface this by saying that this video is to clear up confusion for anybody that does feel confused, that feels that there is an overload of information and they're not quite sure what to make of the idea of states. Now, everything I'm about to share in this video, the intention is to make it clearer and easier for you, and to also ease some of the stress that a lot of people have around being in the state or being in a state all of the time and putting a lot of pressure on states of consciousness. But in order to understand fully what I'm saying, it will require you to unlearn a little bit of what you already know about states. So, my advice for this video is keep an open mind, come in with beginner's mind. And by the end of the video, you should at least be feeling a little bit more clearer. And you get to decide at the end of this if this resonates with you or not. And if it does, great. So the term states often gets confused with emotional states, and that is not what it's referring to. So the easiest way to understand it, first of all, is to look at the full sentence. So what are we referring to when we say states? We're referring to states of consciousness. So let's look at the word consciousness first and foremost, because in my opinion, this is one of the first places where the confusion starts to happen, in that we misunderstand what the term consciousness means and what it's referring to. So when I say states of consciousness, I am saying consciousness with the capital C. So consciousness as God, consciousness as the faceless, formless, source consciousness, infinite awareness, whatever you want to call it, right? It's not referring to the perception of an individualized consciousness that belongs to the separate self. So, in other words, the consciousness of the character of Kristen. It is not referring to that. And the reason for that is because there are no individualized consciousnesses. There is only the appearance of such. It appears that we are navigating the world through this separate consciousness that belongs to the self or the dream character. But really, there is only one consciousness, and that is God. There is only one mind, there is only one dreamer. So when we say states of consciousness, an easier way to understand it could be to refer to it as states of God. That helps us to picture more accurately what it actually means. So states of consciousness, they often get reduced down to emotional states when really everything is a state. Everything is a state in consciousness. Everything is a state in God. I also like to use the word expressions of consciousness or impressions in consciousness interchangeably with the word state, because I feel it helps direct our attention to the more expansive nature of what states actually are, rather than just reducing it down to the emotional state or whatever it is that you're feeling. So, as I said before, everything is a state. Having blonde hair is a state, being a woman is a state. My mug filled with coffee is a state. My dog lay on in the carpet in front of me is a state. You are a state in consciousness. Your desire is a state in consciousness. So when we say get into the state of your desire, get into the desired state, it doesn't mean a desirable emotional state. It means alignment with the state that is your desire, because your desire itself is a state. So the same way that having blonde hair doesn't feel like anything. There is no emotional resonance to having blonde hair. A state is not a mood or an emotion. So we often think of an emotional state, and this is because we're thinking about states from the level of self. We're thinking about it from the level of individualized consciousness. This is why we often confuse it to mean the emotional state of Kristen, but really the word state refers to the expressions of God, which, as we already know, is absolutely everything. Everything is God, everything is consciousness. There is nothing outside of consciousness, there is nothing outside of God. So a state is whatever consciousness or God is expressing as. Everything is a state. All states are manifestations in consciousness, and the human mind cannot conceive of the infinite amounts of states that there are. This is what we mean by there's infinite potential, right? So when we observe a state in consciousness, for example, the state within which your desire is fulfilled, it is common to have an emotional reaction in response to that. Now, this isn't necessary in order to experience the manifestation of it, but it often does happen. And the reason from this is because you are moving in alignment from one state of consciousness to another. And because of that, what happened there is you probably moved from an emotional state of lack or a perception of lack to a perception of abundance. And so the emotional resonance that it has is actually marking the shift from one state to another. But once this new state, this new desired state has been established and accepted, it starts to become more natural to you. So the emotional resonance of it, the emotional high, it starts to wear off. So even if you do have the emotion come up in response to observing a state and aligning with it, this is great, but don't put pressure on it to remain that way because the novelty wears off shortly after, the same way that when a desire manifests, we desire something else. We are always in this constant state of flux and movement. Nothing is ever static. So just because the emotional resonance of a state has worn off, so to speak, it doesn't mean that you have left that state. And this is one of the first places where people start to trip up because they associate this elevated emotion with meaning that they are in the state. And so when that emotion fades away, they then assume that they're out of it. But really, it's not that they necessarily have fallen out of it. It's that they are now panicking and making the assumption that they have. And that is what brings them out of the state, not the fact that they're feeling a different emotion or even that they're feeling an emotion that is opposite to the one that they felt before. So let me give you an example of why being in a desired state, it doesn't necessarily feel like anything after that initial emotional reaction, if you even get that, wears off. So let's say you were married right now. You would not feel happy about that all the time. Sometimes you would resent your partner. Sometimes you would feel great about being married. But most of the time, you wouldn't feel much. You would feel pretty indifferent to it. You would feel natural about it because the state of marriage is so natural to you at this point that you're not even necessarily aware of it. You're not even thinking about it that much. The same way that you're not that aware of the color of your hair. You're not affirming your hair color into existence. You don't wake up every morning and say, oh, I need to get into the state of having blonde hair or whatever color hair, or else it won't manifest anymore. You wouldn't put that kind of pressure on it because you have already accepted the color of your hair. You would already have accepted that you were in a marriage. You would not need to remind yourself of it because it would be accepted as a fact. the same way that you accept the fact that the sun will rise each morning. It's no different. So somebody that is in the state of marriage is going to have good days and bad days and neutral days. They're going to have good moods, bad moods, and neutral moods, but none of them erase or bring them out of the state of being married. They don't just, their marriage doesn't disappear because they're stuck in traffic and they're angry and they're having an argument with their friend in their head, right? So you can be in the state of your desires being fulfilled and still experience a whole range of emotions, and you will. You will, because that is normal. That is the part of the human experience. And putting pressure on yourself to be in a constant high mood all of the time, it's completely unnecessary. And it's also not what we're referring to when we say states or being in the state. So, as I said, a lot of people will panic when they experience a negative emotion or a negative thought because they automatically make the assumption that this means they're not in the desired state. And this is firstly because of the confusion around what states means. Secondly, because they think their thoughts and emotions are manifesting everything, which they're absolutely not. And thirdly, because they don't trust the process and they don't necessarily understand how manifestation works, which is why they think they have to do something in order to get it. This is why they think they have to induce an emotional high and be in it all of the time in order to get the desire. But you can actually experience a full range of emotions and still remain anchored in the desired state. The way you can do this is just by simply observing any negative thoughts or emotions, anything that is coming up that feels unpleasant, observing it, allowing it to pass, and relaxing into the body when these sensations are present and accepting them for what they are. Because when you hold your thoughts and feelings in your loving awareness without resisting them, without trying to change them, and you just allow yourself to let go of those stories. Sorry, that's my dog sneezing in the background. When you let yourself let go of those stories of self that are being reflected back to you, what will happen is you will then start to move into relief. It will start to alleviate itself without you even having to fight against it or flip thoughts around or get yourself into the state. And that's actually something I want to address as well. See, I've been in the manifestation community for about 7 years now. And I was here in the beginning when there was not a coaching industry available. There was not this thriving community that we have today. And I have watched the trends and the patterns in what people are teaching. So in the beginning, and some people do still stick to this teaching, but most people were teaching what I call mental manifestation. It's very up in the realm of the head. It's all about managing thoughts. Your thoughts are creating your reality. It's about affirming, it's about flipping thoughts, it's about mental diets, this kind of stuff. Now, then over the years, the discourse, the dialogue changed to, well, actually, it's your state that you need to tend to. It's your state that you need to shift. It's the state that you need to change. Now, in my opinion, focusing more on a state rather than the quality of your thoughts is more effective. I'm not necessarily saying that one method is wrong and one is right. They both lead to the end result. But in my opinion, focusing on states is a more theoretically accurate way of understanding manifestation. And you know, I like to intellectualize all of this stuff. So I do believe that the move towards educating about states is an improvement. It's an advancement from the mental manifestation. However, unfortunately, it's still being taught with the exact same paradigm. And by that I mean really what has happened is we have replaced the word change your thoughts to change your state. And it's the exact same thing in slightly different wording. But when we don't make this about flipping your emotional state and you just allow whatever is coming up, to be there in your loving awareness, and you observe the egoic self rather than getting entangled in it, you are observing from your true nature, which is consciousness or God. You have been reconnected with your true self or your true identity. I don't like to use the word self when I'm referring to God. And once the unpleasant experience passes, when you're feeling more grounded, you can then cast your awareness back to the desired state, which again is not an emotional state. The desired state is just your desire. You can put your awareness back there, realign with that, and just relax into the knowing that it is done. And with practice, you will get very good at shifting your awareness this way. This is one skill that we do need to build, but as I said, it becomes easier over time, and it will become a lot easier to manage difficult or challenging thoughts and feelings because you will realize that the presence of those does not actually mean that you have left the state unless you decide it means that, unless you begin to panic and spiral and try to counteract the thoughts or feelings that you're having by flipping the thoughts or flipping the state. As I said before, it's the exact same thing. The more you reside in your true nature, the more that you redirect yourself back inwards every time you feel you're being pulled out and you're reacting to the circumstances or you're reacting to your own internal emotional states that are coming up. The more you reside in your true nature, the more you stay in the desired state because you did not allow negative thoughts or feelings to take you out of it. You did not label these things as falling out of the state. You simply observed them, allow them to pass, and remained in the state of the fulfilled desire. And this is what true persistence actually is. And this is an example of you being the version of self that already has the desire, because the version of you that already has it would not be so affected by thoughts or feelings coming up. So, because a state of consciousness is not referring to an emotional state, you don't need to induce an emotion. If you do have an emotional response to entering a state that you're observing, this just marks the transition from one state to another. And the more you practice it, the more natural it will get. So over time, it's going to have less emotional resonance. Now, I have noticed that some of us, we get addicted to that emotional high. Firstly, because we associate it with being in the state, and also because it feels good. So we put pressure on ourselves to be on an adrenaline rush, to be on an emotional high all of the time. But if you can accept that you're not going to be on having elevated emotions all the time without making this a problem, then you can remain in the state. The state feeling natural to you is a good thing, because when you relax into the state in this way, the ego itself then transforms in response, and you start to become the person who has the desire. You start to naturally embody that. This is also why, when it comes to changing self concept, you actually don't have to do that manually. It happens automatically on its own, in alignment with your true nature and in alignment with your desired state. Remember, the separate self, or the perception of a separate self, is a manifestation in consciousness as well. Kristen is also a manifestation, and that manifestation will shift and change when you align with something different. You don't actually have to do it manually yourself. The notion of self changes naturally on its own without you having to even do any healing work or building up the self concept at all. So, upon observing the desired state and relaxing into it and remaining relaxed, even when thoughts and emotions arise that don't feel good, you then end up persisting in your desire. The self transforms as a result, and then the apparent physical world, the divine mirror, reflects the self back. And what does this mean? It means your desire manifests. That is how manifestation works. The quickest and most effective way to manifest is to realize your true nature as consciousness or God. Fully surrender to this, fully surrender to your desired state, and relax in the knowing that it is already done without too much wavering. Again, we don't need to be perfect. Persistence is more important than perfection. But instead of trying to induce an emotion or being in an elevated mood all of the time, relax into your true nature and allow your manifestations to follow.